everyone. You heard the promo. It's time for the I Am Real Estate Show. I'm Ray Smith with Sandra Johnson. We're from the Johnson Smith team, and we have Don Geisler, the designated broker and owner of Indy Realty. We'll continue our series of updating you on the NAR settlement. We're going to talk a little bit more about wire fraud. So I've had a little bit about some statistics, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about pricing. But the thing that we need to talk about, the thing that's going to happen on Monday, is that this NAR settlement starts affecting everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thank you very much for having me on again. I always enjoy it.
You are welcome, Don.
Appreciate it. So August 5th, which is Monday, process changes come about, and that means that broker cooperation compensation fields are going to be deleted from the MLS on Monday. We are already in the process of revising all the new forms and getting in order and having all of our processes in order. So I think, at this point, we've discussed this very much in depth, and I think that we should, I think a key point right now for people to know is, yes, beginning on August 5th, it is going to be mandated that if a potential buyer wants to see a home that is listed in the MLS, they do have to have a written agreement with their with an agent to see homes that are listed in the MLS. And those representation agreements establish compensation and establish that we've had a very transparent conversation with potential buyers about, who's paying, what their responsibilities are, what our responsibilities are, et cetera.
Now, I saw a headline that said that buyers may have to sign an agreement, but if you are going to be looking at a home that is listed in the multiple listing system, then that applies to you.
That is right. That is the MLS rule, and that is the rule that MLS participants are required to follow, which is that we have to obtain a written agreement with the potential buyer. We should point out that the agreements, the employment agreements between buyer and buyer's broker are negotiable, but it does map out, what the compensation is, and these things are negotiable between the parties. And so, you want to know what's in the agreement, you want to know what it says, what the term are, whether it's an exclusive agreement or not is very important for potential buyers to know. But it is incumbent upon the agent to explain these the parts of the agreement in detail so that the buyer is comfortable and understands it, and that there are no surprises later.
So you could have a licensed agent who is not a realtor, who does not participate in our multiple listing service, that could still not be requiring that form. But if you are working with a realtor, then expect to have that conversation with your realtor before you see a house.
Yeah, and I don't want to sit here and as a blanket statement say that, all participants are realtors, et cetera, and go down that path right at this moment. But yes, there is a distinction. You can be a licensee in Arizona and not be a realtor. A realtor is a member of the association, the National Association of Realtors. But as it stands right now, the rule is if you want to view a property that is listed in the MLS, you have to have a written agreement with the realtor that's going to show you that property.
I think another misconception is that this is a law, and it is not a law. It is a rule of our association.
It is not a law, and it is a rule of the association. But, I would clarify that, and I think that deserves a little bit of conversation, which is that the MLS has agreed to abide by these rules as part of the settlement from a lawsuit. So it doesn't make it a law, but it becomes rules that we are bound to because of the process of law, right? So, yes, so we're going to have that requirement, but at this time, it is not law that we have to obtain this agreement, but it is part of the rules that the MLS have agreed to as part of the settlement, which again was a result of a legal proceeding. So we are bound by those rules and to operate within the confines of those rules. So though it would be erroneous to say that it is a, quote, law, it is a requirement of MLS participants which stems from an operation of law, which was the lawsuit.
So again, for a point of clarity, if someone is out looking at open houses, are they required to sign a buyer broker employment agreement?
No, we are being told no at this time. And the thought process behind that is that somebody who is holding a house open is operating on behalf of that seller, trying to get that house sold. They do have an agreement with the seller, and that's part of the marketing of the property. So in that scenario, what we've been told and what's been very clear is that buyers are, invited to come in and see the house, and a written agreement is not required there. If they choose to move forward on the house, then that would change up. They're going to have some sort of agreement to clarify what is the agency situation here. Are you represented? Are you unrepresented? There's several different pathways that we go down from that point. But to answer that initial question, no, they can walk into the house if it's an open house and the public's being invited in.
So if someone has already signed an agreement with their agent, they were working together prior to the implementation of the new rules, should they expect to sign a new agreement?
I think people should expect to sign a new agreement because, as of the 5th, these things are going to be out of MLS. And the enforcement mechanism for some of these things was the MLS, and that literally goes away on Monday. So to ensure that the process operates smoothly, that there are no surprises, that the escrow operates smoothly, if we have existing buyer-broker agreements, when that date passes, or existing listing agreements, we should get some clarification. We should clarify via an addendum. We should clarify those existing agreements to reflect the new processes.
Do you want to clarify or just have them use the new documents that are out there as of 5th of August?
Well, I mean, we have the documents available now. We're processing them now. Monday's just a couple days away. So we as a company, our process is that we are using the new documents and the new process because it is the process that we're going to follow. It's going to follow all the way through a potential sale to the end of closing. So I'm very comfortable saying the new documents are available. The process is in just a couple days. So we might as well just go with the new process now.
I just believe that I think it's easier to do the new documents now because in 4 or 5 years when you get audited, you have a better understanding as what happened on August 5th. So if you just start all your documents now, you don't have to try to have an addendum there or try to find some reason why you didn't have this, why at the 15th of August that document is not in the forms.
Yeah, and there's always a little gray area when you make a massive document switch or process switch. There are people and escrows and transactions that are kind of caught in that gray area, but we'll be able to manage it. We're ready and we'll manage it appropriately.
As much as I think someone may be asked to sign that new agreement, I think it's fair to say that doesn't mean if you are under contract with an agent that your old one is void.
Yeah.
Do not assume that anything
is void.
That's exactly right.
You're listening to the I Am Real Estate Show with Ray Smith, Sandra Johnson, and Don Geisler. We'll be back with another segment talking a little bit about wire fraud, stats, and pricing. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. You're here with the I Am Real Estate Show with Ray Smith, Sandra Johnson, and Don Geisler. Don Geisler is the designated broker for Indy Realty.
We were talking about the fact that if you were going to be walking into an open house with the new rules that are in place, that you really are not required to sign an agreement with that agent to represent you. And so I just kind of wanted to add on to that, I guess. At what point have we established agency where someone is relying on us as a licensed professional? And kind of talk about that difference, I guess, of when we are representing that person.
So this is a super interesting question, and there are literally classes built around answering this question, which is agency can be established even when a written agreement is not in place. So, a rule of thumb, and this is vague, but a rule of thumb is if we start answering questions about a property, about the process, if we start obtaining information on behalf of somebody, if we start passing information along, for somebody's for them to analyze, then you can very much establish an agency relationship without having a written agreement. And so basically, again, as a very high level rule of thumb, you start asking questions, start answering questions, start providing information. You could have be viewed as having an implied agency right there on the spot. And you could have already established an agency relationship with that person without even knowing it. And I can tell you that the Department of Real Estate, undisclosed dual agency, there's a lot of complaints about undisclosed dual agency, and a lot of them stem from exactly this type of circumstance, where if you are answering questions and you're giving them information and you're starting to assist them, even though you haven't signed an agreement, you have agency. So the concept of agency and the fact of whether you've signed a formal agreement or not, they're intertwined, but it's not totally black and white as when you establish that agency agreement.
I think it's complicated too, because compensation really doesn't have anything to do with establishing that agency.
It absolutely does not. And that's the thing, is you can find, as an agent, you can find yourself with all of the responsibilities and duties and, dare I say, liabilities that come with representing somebody, and you do not, that doesn't mean that you're getting paid. Whether you receive compensation comes from comes from a written agreement that says, in fact, that you are getting paid. So,
and I gave you no warning for this, so forgive me.
I think after 24 years, I got a fairly decent grasp on where we're at. You can throw anything at me you want. If I don't know it, I will tell you I don't know it. We'll figure it out.
So in the case that someone were to approach the listing agent and say, I want to be an unrepresented buyer. Mm-hmm. Now we've added another layer to that of, if I am providing information because it's my listing and they want to be unrepresented, we really need to go to a written agreement to say that I'm not representing you.
That is exactly right. And that is the right process, and that is entirely the way it should be handled. Whether historically it's always been handled that way is highly questionable, which is why there are so many complaints about undisclosed dual agencies, and agents kind of accidentally back into it. But this is very clear and very simple. If a buyer specifically says, I do not want representation, but they are interested in the house, well, we've got a form for that, right? And we've got a form that clearly says that they are unrepresented, that there is no agency created by our actions, either express or implied, and that they are going forward. And it also goes forward to say that they can seek the counsel of an agent if they want. They can seek the counsel of an attorney if they want. But it very clearly says that they are not represented by us. And that, the scenario that you're thinking about is if we have a listing and somebody says we clearly represent the seller. We have a bona fide agency representation with the seller.
Right.
Buyer walks in and says, I do not want representation. And yes, we get them to sign that form, and they acknowledge and affirm that they understand that there is no agency in place. We still have the duties to treat parties fairly.
Right.
But we don't have fiduciary duties to them.
So it's likely that you would be providing information to them. Maybe it's what the HOA fees are, what does it cover, things like that. So there is still going to be an exchange of information, but it is a very difficult thing to define.
It can be. And for somebody that hasn't been in the industry or, is listening that's not part of the industry, yeah, I mean, it could be kind of strange to hear that the exact point that agency becomes a thing is not necessarily very well defined.
When you sign something.
And it's not, because it's not when you sign something. So again, being subject to being required to pay compensation, that can only happen when you have a written agreement, that clearly defines what the compensation is, who's paying it, where it's coming from. But for the agents out there, like I said, you can very well find yourself in a situation where you have all the responsibilities of being an agent and you are not guaranteed to be paid, and you might not.
Working for free is a bad business model. That has been my motto for years now. because we do expect to be compensated for the work that we do. No one can sustain themselves if they're not being compensated. There was another question I had, I guess, as far as a buyer who is not represented. And so that is kind of, I want to say, a slippery slope, right? At what point are you qualified to represent yourself in the transaction, and what risks are involved?
So this is a good one, and I'm sure that this is going to take us into the next segment also, because I assure you that it's complicated. Okay, I assure you that the transactions are complicated, that the requirements are complicated. I also assure you that anybody that is sitting there saying, well, we can get everything we need on the internet, you are just dead wrong. So again, I'm very proud of this number. I say it all the time. I'm 24 years in the business right now, and every single day, every week, I have an agent come to my office and say, this came up, and I'm like, that is a first for me. And so
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that when I've asked a question.
Yeah, it's
Not of you
unbelievable.
necessarily, but in my 10 years of doing this, when I would walk into someone's office and say, my broker, and say, hey, I have a question. And if I had $1 for every time I was told, this is the first time this has come up, it's just the way real estate is.
It really is. And I can tell you that yes, it's complex, and there's stuff that we have to investigate, and there's government agencies, there's all kind of things. But, really, if you're a buyer, you could put yourself in a position where you are going to breach the contract, and then you can be held accountable. You could be sued, basically, and you could be sued for damages. You could be sued for specific performance, meaning you're going to get sued to buy the house, whether you decide you wanted it or not.
Right.
And market-wide, our average for deals that fall through is 15%. That's with professionals on each side that spend their whole every waking minute doing this. So imagine what it would happen, without that representation.
You're listening to the I Am Real Estate Show. That was Don Geisler, the designated broker for Indy Realty. You got Ray Smith and Sandra Johnson. We're both from the Johnson Smith team. We're also part of Indy Realty. See you for the third segment. Hi, guys. We're back. Thanks for spending part of your afternoon with the Johnson Smith team at Indy Realty. It's Ray Smith and Sandra Johnson from Indy Realty, and we're here with Don Geisler, who is the designated broker for Indy Realty.
We were talking a little bit before going on break about a home buyer and looking at a home on their own. And one of the things that I was thinking about is, as consumers, we have really been trained to do a lot of our research on products. We have product reviews. We can go online and we can compare one product to the next. But it is so much more complicated with a house, because no two houses are the same. Could have been built by the same builder. They might be in the same community, but the types of things that we see are so very different from house to house.
Every transaction is unique. And so I know very well there's a school of thought out there that, buyers can get all this information on the internet and they don't need an agent, and agents just want to get paid. And I vehemently would look anybody in the eye and say that's not true at all. Like, I know those of us in this room and the types of people that we hire, we're not chasing commission dollars. We're chasing, trying to help people fulfill their dreams, and it's very, very complicated. And so no transaction is alike. I've already mentioned that I see something new every single week, and I'm like, oh, well, we're going to deal with that and do the best we can.
Right.
But so in a market, in a process that has vast complexity, it also, the magnitude of the emotions involved in a transaction are out of this world.
Yep.
Okay. And so part of it is helping when you have an objective, professional, educated professional in the middle of an emotional storm. It is so valuable, because we have the ability to be, to take a look at it from 35,000 feet, to say, here are your options, here's what you can do. And it's our duty to not be emotional about it. So no matter what anybody says, emotion plays a very, very large part in real estate purchases. And I can tell you that if any of us can look back over our lives, and if we isolate some of the worst decisions that we've ever made, they're typically either steeped in maybe a drink or two, or a heck of a lot of emotion, you know? And so trust me, it exists in every single transaction. And so there is the actual technical difficult part of it. There's the liability part of it. It is a binding contract that is several pages long. I always look at the contract as a choose your own adventure, you know, meaning that here's your option in this clause. You can either do A, B, or C. And each one of those things branch off into, this can go in 3 different directions if we do it that way. And there's just so much education. But yes, the transaction's complicated. The rules are complicated. And trust me, the people are complicated.
I think,
and I was going to say the average price of a home is going to be around $350,000. That is a huge mistake to make if you are not well educated, and if there's something that were to pop up on that. You know, I think buying a car is hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not an easy decision to make. And we are able to compare a make and model and look at the performance and reviews and things. And it's not the same when it comes to purchasing a residence. We could have the same floor plan on opposite sides of the street. One may be in an area where water intrusion is a very high potential. One may have better views, and assessing all of those things into the price or into the amount of risk someone might be taking. We've seen business models over the years where they were flat rates or they were limited service, and those business models don't tend to be attractive to your average consumer.
right.
Well, I would say they're available, and they've always been available. And that's what the really cool thing that we should really circle back around to is that I listen to all this stuff and these lawsuits and people saying they were manipulated and they didn't know and they didn't have a choice. And I'm going to just tell you, garbage, bull, whatever words you want to insert there, because we have always had the option to sell our home on our own, you know, if you choose to. And there are so many different wonderful models out there for real estate brokerages. Consumers have always had choices.
Right.
You know, so again, I mean, it just gets back to, we are moving into an era of being more transparent, and we will cater to the people that understand it least, and we will explain it until every person that is buying a home feels like they are educated enough to do it. I can tell you, you start getting into big and more complicated things that you don't understand. And like, I bought a vehicle recently, and I've bought many, many vehicles in my life, and I fully understand, you know, high level what the process is. And I know that there are models out there where I can buy one and have it just delivered to my house and it's done. And I sat down and I looked at these options, and I'm like, I'm not ready for that. You know, no matter what you think of the process, I was still in a place where I had to walk in and say, I just need to hand this off to the professional.
Right.
And you guide us through this. And then even when I was leaving, I'm like, you know, I don't do this very often, even though I've done it many times in my life, many more times than I bought a house, obviously. And I'm like, okay, so I don't do this very often. So now what? You know, what about license plates? What about this? What about that? What about insurance? And they're just calmly guiding me through stuff that I wouldn't know. And yeah, you could find it on the internet. You could get a divorce on the internet. You could form an LLC you could do all these things on the internet, but is it always in your best interest? No. And I have sold enough literally thousands of houses, and I promise you it's complicated.
With that being said, I think the problem that we have, and I don't want to pat us on the back, but we make this look so easy when they have the sellers and buyers, because we don't give them all the details of what's going on. We tell them, here's the forms. You take care of this. We tell you what the forms understand, but then we go through all the other behind the scenes practices and processes. Right. We have access to a lot of things and processes. We go through all those things, and then we give you the product.
And I got to tell you, there are nights I can't sleep. And it's not because of a house I'm buying. It's because of a house that my clients are buying. And you're looking at timelines and inspections and fraud. I think fraud is a huge thing.
I do too. Yeah, yes.
And when my clients have said, "Oh, I already sent that money into the title company," and I just I can't sleep until morning, and when I talk to that title or escrow officer to see if they actually sent it to the right place or if they were defrauded out of their money. So
I think we should talk a little bit about fraud after
yeah. Stay tuned for the last segment. You're here with Ray Smith, Sandra Johnson, and Don Geisler. We're all from Indy Realty. Don Geisler is a designated broker. And we're going to talk a little bit about wire fraud. I'm going to say fireside.
Fireside wire fraud.
Chat on wire fraud.
Yeah,
in
we're
the
going to
middle of the
fireside chat
summer.
on wire fraud. I have a little commercial for you. If you're looking to buy or sell your home, you need a real estate professional, please call the Johnson Smith team. Ray Smith can be reached at 520-904-7711. Sandra Johnson can be reached at 520-850-1725. And Danielle Johnson can be reached at 520-373-6864. Don, how can someone get a hold of you?
I can be reached at 520-869-2376. We're always looking for great quality real estate professionals to come join the team. Again, I'm Don. I am the designated broker and CEO. My number is 520-869-2376.
We've been talking a little bit about some of the things that an agent can really do and help a person. One thing we didn't mention is some of the pitfalls that be out there, like wire fraud.
I saw an article last week, and unfortunately, it's not a unique article, but what is alarming is that it's still so prevalent, and it's still just the same old. But although they get more and more sophisticated, but the scheme is the same old scheme. And so, I was reading this article, and a lady in California wired over $400,000, and this goes without saying, this is her life savings, all right? And she wired the money. She's in the process of purchasing a home, and she received instructions that appeared to come from the escrow officer, and they did not. They came from a third-party bad actor who had cut their way into the transaction, was watching it, and they're sophisticated enough to know right during the course of a transaction the right time frame where people would be saying, okay, now send your down payment, send your money to this account. And it was a bogus account, and that money was gone, and it's over $400,000. So, we really want to put out there with this particular type of fraud, the way that this works, and everybody is subject to these phishing emails. We see it all the time, all these email scams that go on out there. But on these ones, these people are able to hack into people's email and watch the transaction unfold. And they're watching the transaction unfold. And then right at the right moment, like I said, they will craft an email that looks like it came from an escrow officer. It may look like it came from their agent, depending on the scenario, telling them to wire money to a certain account, and it's bogus. And so, first off, as a blanket statement, you should never be getting wiring instructions from your real estate agent. Never. And
we don't even want to know where you bank or where your money's. We don't want any of that.
We don't want to know. So I could tell you, from one of the things that agents have to be able to express to people, you receive an email from me at any time that says wire your money anywhere, you have to assume it's bogus. Now, we use encrypted email, and we have high security on our email package and stuff like that, but not everybody does, and none of them are infallible. So it is so important to have that conversation. You will not receive wiring instructions from me. Then if you do receive wiring instructions from the escrow officer, it is so important to pick up the telephone and dial that escrow officer through a phone number that you know for a fact is their office line.
Can you explain that why, Don? Because they'll look at that email and see that phone number that's there.
They will. Yeah. So if they craft a bogus email, they will also put, a bogus telephone number on there. And so if you just call the telephone number that's on the email, you could very well be just calling the fraudster, and this has happened before.
Right.
And they know how to speak. They're sophisticated. They know where they're at with this. So it is so important for you to confirm before you wire any money. Confirm if you're local, walk into the escrow office look the escrow officer in the eye and say, did you send me these instructions? I want to verify it. If you have to do it by telephone, ensure that you are calling a number that you know for a fact is that escrow officer's telephone number, and regard any emails that you receive as fake. Assume they're fake. Be above and beyond. Be as obnoxious as you need to ensure that you're not sending your money someplace it shouldn't go.
I say even your social security number, anything that someone could use that has ill will, be very careful with the internet, with the email.
Absolutely. The fraud that goes on out there is crazy. And then another type of fraud, is deed fraud is going on right now. And they tend to be situated with like land listings, raw land type listings for sale, where you got a piece of land and somebody fraudulently tells somebody, whether it's an agent or real estate company or just themselves, just put something out there that says, I'm selling this piece of land, and they don't own the land. And they can get through the entire process, And so red flags are, if you're doing all of your communication via email, you can't get anybody on the phone, you can't get them in person. A whole transaction is being done via email is suspect right from the get-go. You have to verify the party that you're working with. And so, there was a time where somebody could call us from California, say, hey, I have this property, I need to list it. The names match up, you think that you're good. Those days are way, way over. We have to assume that when somebody calls us and says, I own this piece of land, that we got to prove it. You got to prove to me that you own the piece of land. But these types of fraud are happening every day. And people go home, they've experienced fraud, and they're like, in this day and age, how could this even happen?
Right.
Like, I literally just bought a piece of land and that wasn't the seller, and that money's gone, and I really don't own that land. And in this day and age, how can it happen? We're in an age of technology. People know how to take advantage of that and exploit it. And you have to be, you just have to be vigilant.
I was going to say, there are AI apps that we can't believe what we see because it may be something that's been created. We can't necessarily believe what we hear on a phone call unless that person is standing in front of us. We have to question everything, especially if it just doesn't feel right.
Absolutely. And, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention one of the original types of fraud where if a house is listed for sale, people know that house is vacant. They list it on Craigslist as a rental. They don't have anything to do with this property, but they steal the photos from the internet. They craft a fake, like Craigslist ad possibly, and say this house is for rent. And these things go as far as a renter, a legitimate renter comes in, doesn't know any better, gives this person that they're interacting with first month's rent and a deposit, and then those people disappear, and they didn't have anything to do with this house. And those potential renters are out that money, and it's not coming back. So, in the real estate industry, we move large amounts of money. There's a lot of technology. That scenario I just mentioned is not all that technological at all.
Right.
These people show up face to face, take the money from their hands, and they're gone. But we're in an industry where there can be a lot of fraud. We move lots of money on a daily basis, and you just have to be super vigilant.
Absolutely. I know you brought stats with you today. Do you want to talk a little bit about where the market is? We've been complaining about the hot temperatures out there and that nobody's leaving their houses, but we're still buying and selling.
There is plenty of business still going on. I can tell you through the end of June, and we're going to be very soon, we'll have stats, through the end of July. But through the end of June, something that was interesting, our units are down almost 16%. The units were down almost 16%. And I just think it's critical when we're listing a house to make sure that we're aware of the pricing. In some ways, pricing has been up and interest rates have been up, but we're starting to see some locations in town in a lot of scenarios where prices are having to stair step down a little bit in
Uh-huh.
order for property to move.
Yeah.
So I just encourage sellers, be aware, a price that was available and possible for a house 6 months ago might not be possible. And, depending on the stats that we look at, the days on market are increasing. I've seen some scenarios where the average days on market are, 80 days. And I remember when it was 8 days, and so it's just real important to make sure that if you're marketing a house, that you pay attention to marketing it to sell and you're paying attention to that price point.
And anything else you wanted to bring to us today regarding stats?
No, I think that's the most important thing, is to just be aware that, the impact of the interest rates being up a little bit
Yeah.
and pricing being up a little bit is starting to, have an effect where prices are starting to come down. So, any sellers that have questions should call us for sure and get a real bona fide professional market analysis on their property.
And I would add that, there's some talk out there that sellers don't have to offer compensation for a buyer's agent. And with increasing days on market, there's a cost to sitting on the market, and you may shrink your buyer pool by not helping a buyer out. Buyers are already kind of struggling with the price of the house and the interest rates. And so it's just adding another barrier. And so far, the sellers that we've talked to really get that, and they don't want to increase their days on market. So they've been really good about listening and entertaining those conversations. That said, we did have a price reduction on our listing at 2270 South Diamond D Drive. That's in Tucson Estates number 2. It's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2,286 square feet. It is range priced from $600,000 to $630,000. Really special property that was built just this year, 2024. And also, if you happen to use any of our sponsors, Indy Realty, Pillar to Post, Pioneer Title Agency, Rego Pest Prevention, or John Spur at Inspired Life, we would ask that you let them know that you heard about them on the I Am Real Estate show.
I'll see you next week on the I Am Real Estate show. This has been Ray Smith, Sandra Johnson, and Don Geisler, all from Indy Realty, 7255 East Tango Verde.